Well, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this edition of the 700 Club. Vicious tornadoes have claimed the lives of about 35 people. It's been horrible what's happening. Devastation in the South, and we understand as many as 130 million people are under threat of the terrible snowstorms that are now taking the east by storm, I think we can use.
Yes, the Northeast. It just seems never ending, doesn't it? Yeah. Well, sadly, that death toll could go even higher. And this morning, search and rescue teams are still combing through the debris. Mark Martin has the story.
Officials say more than a dozen tornadoes reportedly struck parts of Alabama and Georgia. They knocked homes off their foundations, leveled trees, destroyed cars, and left thousands without power.
I was sitting there praying, asking the Lord to protect everybody around us.
It went from dark to daylight. I just watched it just suck the clouds in and everything.
In Alabama, authorities say a powerful F3 tornado, typically carrying winds more than 158 miles an hour, tore down a country road, leaving a path of damage a half-mile wide. Residents are in shock, but trying to move forward and help those in need.
I've lived here my whole life. Me personally, this is especially getting out and helping. This is the worst.
The entire state of Alabama is under a state of emergency.
Just to say it.
You just heard the voice of a man in Georgia showing the destruction in his neighborhood.
It can happen at any time of the year. We've seen severe outbreaks in January and February and December, as a matter of fact. But you have extremely cold air across much of the central United States, and you had what was left of the very warm, humid air in the southeast. And when the storms, of course, use those boundaries to create a clash that is part of the back and forth of weather.
The death toll is high in Alabama, and officials warn it's expected to rise. Search and rescue workers are looking for survivors, even flying drones with heat-sensing devices attached to them. Meanwhile, the same winter weather system is dumping snow, sleet, and rain from New York to Boston, making for treacherous driving conditions. In addition, the Midwest and West saw its share of snow and dangerous weather. Outside of Denver, this pickup went off the road and landed in an icy creek. As the storm continues to move, it has affected more than 130 million Americans across the eastern half of the country. Mark Martin, CBN News.
Well, have you heard about global warming? I don't think it's happening right now, folks. But in any event, you know, I don't know what the Democrats are trying to do. I should know, but they're trying to destroy the President of the United States. And, you know, he's the president of all of us. And what will be accomplished if he's tied up for the next 2 or 3 months, or 2 or 3 years, I should say, with continued harassment? And Jerry Nadler and the people on the left are their committee chairman now. They have the House. But, you know, as I understand the law, they cannot just have a fishing expedition to subpoena all of the people who work in the administration and force them to testify. There has to be pursuant to some legislative initiative. And what is this whole business about... well, they're giving away the Russian collusion. They think that Mueller's investigation is over and they hadn't found anything. So they're not going on that. But they're talking about obstruction of justice. Well, how does a president obstruct justice when he talks to people who report to him and his administration? That's no obstruction of anything. But in any event, folks, hold on to your seatbelts. A political storm is set to hit the Trump administration, and John Jessup has more about that.
That's right, Pat. Democrats are stepping up their investigations into President Trump. Today, they're seeking information from dozens of people and organizations, some of them within the president's inner circle. CBN's Jenna Browder has the story from here in Washington.
House Democrats are broadening the scope of their investigations, demanding documents from scores of people, including the president's own children, former business associates, and Trump administration officials.
We will be issuing document requests to over 60 different people and individuals from the White House to begin the investigations to present the case to American people about obstruction of justice, corruption, and abuse of power.
Representative Jerry Nadler, chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, says it's too early to talk about impeachment, but he does believe Trump obstructed justice. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, though, insists Nadler's goal has always been impeachment.
I think Congressman Nadler decided to impeach the president the day the president won the election.
There are now 6 committees investigating the president for alleged collusion with Russia in the 2016 election, his tax returns, and possible conflicts of interest in his business dealings. Nadler says the committees will use all legal means necessary to get the information they're seeking. Trump says these new investigations are coming because special counsel Robert Mueller's probe isn't panning out.
There's no collusion, so now they go and morph into, let's inspect every deal he's ever done.
All this after Trump's former personal attorney Michael Cohen's blistering testimony before Congress last week. Nadler says Cohen's testimony opened up new avenues. Trump, though, says holding the hearings at the same time as the Hanoi summit weakened him in negotiations with Kim Jong-un, tweeting Sunday, "For the Democrats to interview in open hearings a convicted liar and fraudster at the same time as the very important nuclear summit with North Korea is perhaps a new low in American politics and may have contributed to the walk. Never done when a president is overseas. Shame." And there's more political bad news for the president today. GOP Senator Rand Paul is expected to join 3 other Republican senators to block a resolution on President Trump's declared emergency to build a border wall. The resolution has already been passed by the House. President Trump is expected to veto it. In Washington, Jenna Browder, CBN News.
Thanks, Jenna. Pat, as you said earlier, get ready for a bumpy ride.
Well, you know, it has been pointed out, and I echo this, that what the president should have done was declare victory and then walk away from this deal. He should have said, look, I've got the money I was looking for. I've got other packets of money available, and I will start the construction of the wall. They've allocated, you know, whatever it is, the amount, and I've got some other available to me. He didn't need to declare a national emergency. That's going to open him up to some problems, and then they'll have fights back and forth he didn't need. But in terms of again, I want to reiterate, there has to be some legislative purpose to these investigations. The House is not authorized under the Constitution to just perform a fishing expedition against the chief executive. They just do not have that authority, nor does the chief executive report to the Congress. The Congress has its duties under the Constitution. The chief executive has his duty to faithfully execute the laws. But what he did in his business dealings before the people of the United States elected him president is totally irrelevant. And to investigate all of that is beyond the scope of their authority. So I'm looking to people to push back. I was in a meeting this past weekend talking about our school, and Jay Sekulow was in the meeting. There were several of us in my office, and he took a telephone call. He came back and he said, well, I just heard from your chief executive. I said, who are you talking about? I said, the president. He called him from Air Force One on the way back from Hanoi, and basically they are preparing for a battle.
But Pat, if you're telling us that they don't have the ground to stand on for this, why isn't anybody saying anything about that? Why aren't they calling?
And others are saying it, but it's got to be said over and over again. They do not have constitutional authority to go on a fishing expedition against the president in his dealings before he was elected. That is just, what legislature are they going to pass on that? I mean, there is no legislative purpose, and if they don't have it, these fishing expeditions are extrajudicial and unconstitutional. And I think it's time that we admit that and start talking about it. And I think a lot of people have got to talk about it. Congress just can't do this. They're supposed to, now, in terms of the budget process, they're supposed to pass the budget, and they have to allocate things. And if he breaks forth in that, that's a different matter. But what he did with his business dealings before he was elected, and what he does with his own administration along the way, just isn't a subject of legislative action. It just isn't. So get with it, guys. And those of you on the right, start screaming. John?
Pat, the United States and South Korea are calling off their annual joint military exercises. Defense officials from both nations cited ongoing negotiations with North Korea. Pyongyang regularly denounces the drills carried out by the Americans and South Koreans. This is the second year in a row the drills have been put on hold. Meanwhile, President Trump's still dealing with fallout from the Hanoi summit. The parents of OTTO Warmbier, the American college student who died after suffering abuse in a North Korean prison, are angry over the president not holding Kim Jong-un responsible for their son's death. It centers on the president saying he takes Kim at his word that he didn't know what happened to OTTO. In a statement, the Warmbiers said Kim and his evil regime are responsible for the death of our son. Saturday, the president responded.
Horrible position, because in one way, I have to negotiate. In the other way, I love Mr. and Mrs. Warmbier, and I love OTTO. And it's a very, very delicate balance.
The president later tweeted that he holds North Korea responsible for OTTO Warmbier's death. Well, the world is watching Venezuela as opposition President Juan Guaido plans to return to the country today out of concerns the Maduro government will arrest him. Maduro banned Guaido from leaving the country, but he went to Colombia last week to meet with international leaders and to try to bring aid into the country. Maduro says he broke the law and must face justice. On Fox News Sunday, National Security Advisor John Bolton said arresting Guaido would be a mistake.
We're going to watch what happens. I think we've warned Maduro and his henchmen and the Cubans very clearly. If Maduro took that step, I think it would just hasten the day that he leaves.
The U.S. and 50 other nations recognize Guaido as Venezuela's legitimate president after the National Assembly installed him, claiming Maduro stole the election. Pat, back to you.
I think it's time for action. I know people think it's terrible, and somebody wrote me and said, well, do you really want to go to war with Venezuela? Well, not really. But at the same time, there needs to be a police action. There's a rogue killer at loose in the world. And the nations in South America and Central America need to come together to rein that man in, and if it takes military force to do it. I think if we just mass some of our weaponry on the border of Venezuela and let them see the power that's there, I think that military would suddenly say, well, okay, the big guy's in charge. You remember a few years ago when the Iranians stormed into our embassy and held our embassy people hostage. And then you remember Jimmy Carter said, well, I've got the Rose Garden strategy. I'm going to sit in the Rose Garden and hope for these things to work out. You know, we elected Ronald Reagan as president, and the day of his inauguration, they let our people free. But why? Because they said the cowboy's in charge, and he's going to shoot up our rug bazaar, and he's going to come in with military force. Once that was done, they began to behave themselves. I think it's the same thing with Maduro. He's a thug. He's a monster. He has mistreated his people. They're suffering horribly, and we should not allow that to happen. And so John Bolton is right in saying, well, it'll hasten his demise, but all this back and forth about all these niceties, I think it's time, again, mass arms outside the border and let that military know that they're going to be killed. And once they see some of these Hellfire missiles and stuff we've got available, it won't be long before they say, well, okay, Maduro, it's been fun, but you're out and we're leaving you. That's all that's happened. If those military people will abandon Maduro, he will fall like a stone. We've got to do it. All right. There's a sad story right now. We think of the great Christians that came out of Great Britain. We think of the Wesleys. We think of Tyndale. We think of the marvelous hymns that have come out of England, and all of the Christianity, and the fact that the Queen, you know, and the Archbishop and others, they say we're a Christian nation. Well, sad things are happening. It's now not just London as London stand. I mean, it's gone to Islam. John has the story.
Well, Pat, Britain, once the home of world missions, is increasingly becoming hostile to the gospel. Recently, a viral video of police arresting an elderly Nigerian man preaching in the street ignited outrage. Dale Hurd has a story from London.
I can be arrested if you want.
His name is Preacher Alu. He's a London street preacher who was arrested last Saturday for breach of the peace and Islamophobia. Phone video of his arrest was spread worldwide on social media. The woman who shot the video, Ambrosine Shitrit, spoke to CBN News in this exclusive interview.
A man with a hoodie was trying to humiliate, to be aggressive towards this Christian street preacher. I could see that he was a Muslim man because he was talking about, no, Allah is the right way.
But London police didn't arrest the Muslim man threatening a Christian preacher. They arrested Preacher Alu. Britain is officially a Christian nation, but if someone is street preaching and another person complains about it, British police are quick to move in.
You're preaching. I'm going to require you to go away. You can never.
Okay, then I will arrest you for a breach of peace. Plain and simple.
What breach of peace?
It's what you're doing at the moment. You're causing problems, you're disturbing people's days, and you're breaching their peace.
But Shitrit says the only person being disturbed by Preacher Alu was the Muslim man.
Nobody was offended by the preaching. Nobody.
Andrea Williams of the Christian Legal Center is advising Preacher Alu of his legal rights.
This was completely an overreach of their authority. There was no basis upon which to arrest Pastor Alu.
One of the officers even ripped the Bible from Preacher Alu's hands.
Don't take my Bible away.
Preacher Alu was reportedly driven out of the area and, in the words of the police, de-arrested and dumped in an area without money to get home. Williams said she's not sure if Preacher Alu will bring charges against the police. She says she sees cases like this against Christian preachers on almost a weekly basis. Dale Hurd, CBN News, London.
Thanks, Dale. Well, Regent University welcomed the new dean of its law school Friday. Mark Martin is the former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of North Carolina. He served as a judge for 26 years, more than 20 of them on the state's high court. In his speech, Martin referenced British Olympic runner Eric Liddell, portrayed in the film Chariots of Fire, who refused to race in an Olympic event on a Sunday because of his faith. Martin said Liddell's story, quote, holds special lessons for us here at Regent Law. This is an institution that holds such a calling in the highest regard. Pat, an exciting time for Regent.
It was a wonderful celebration. Judge Mark Martin is a distinguished jurist. He was Chief Judge of the North Carolina Supreme Court, and he's brought with him Marion Warren, who was in charge of all of the court system in North Carolina. The two of them are going to be very powerful as the dean and assistant dean in the Regent University Law School. We had a marvelous ceremony. The Board of Trustees of Regent gathered around Judge Martin and prayed for him in that ceremony that took place Friday evening. It was a marvelous experience. Now, I want to say about that Regent Law School, we've had 3,300 graduates, practice law in 49 states, more than 20 countries, and include 38 sitting judges. Pre-Law magazine said the top 20 most innovative law schools in America. And if you're interested, by the way, in a legal career with outstanding scholars, the number to call is 866-910-7615. Regent University and the School of Law, which now has some very distinguished graduates.
Just keeps getting better and better over there.
Isn't that great?
It's true.
It's marvelous.
Yes.
It was a wonderful experience.
That's great. Well, congratulations. How wonderful.
Yeah.